Welcome to Spiritual Cartel's Big Book Study. It's with great pleasure to introduce Eric S., who has come to share with us today. Eric, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Purdy. Thank you so much. My name is Eric, and I am an alcoholic, and I loved cocaine. I don't normally get to say that when you don't say that in AA meetings. I go primarily to AA meetings, but I got to tell you, I loved cocaine. I also love sex. I love pornography. I love nicotine. I loved it all. Anything that was going to get me out of myself, anything that gave me that buzz. I love this meeting. I love your intro. I love the video. I love the music. I felt like I was Mario Rivera coming out, to close the game, man. I'm like, this is going to be freaking awesome here today. So I really, really love that. Couple of things I want to say. I loved your opening. I loved this idea that that we don't tolerate bullying in here in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? We're all welcome here. I'm sorry, Cocaine Anonymous. See, I'm so in such a habit of saying AA. That, there's no bullying. And see, here's the thing. With addiction, with alcoholism, with any of this stuff, it doesn't give a shit. It doesn't. I'm sorry for the language. Are we allowed to curse in here? Because no cursing? No? Okay. All right. I'm going to behave myself. I'm going to clean it up. I like to curse too, so I'm going to clean it up for you guys. All right. So, here's the thing. Addiction doesn't care if you're white, black, gay, transsexual, homosexual, straight. It does not care. Alcoholism doesn't care. And here's the best part. God doesn't care either. God loves you just the way that you are right here, right now, right? I absolutely love it. So I love that you mentioned the part where it said, the love and tolerance, right? But you left a part out. It's love and tolerance of others is our code. And I love that, right? Of everybody, love and tolerance of others, whether it's in the rooms of CA, AA, or out there in the world. That's our code. That's the code that I try to live by today, right? And I hate to be a jerk to point that out, but I feel like that is, I can swear, fucking A, let's rock. All right, so there it is. All right, I misunderstood that. Yeah, we're going to drop some bombs today. So here's the deal. I'm going to tell you what the real problem is. My real problem is not addiction. My real problem is not alcoholism. That's not my real problem. If I go back to page 45, it tells me specifically what my real problem is. It says right there, that first full paragraph, lack of power. That was my dilemma. I've got a spiritual malady. This book tells me that once the spiritual malady is overcome, I straighten out mentally and physically, right? I don't have the power. See, the implication here is that if my problem is addiction, all I got to do is put down the cocaine and my problem's solved. All I got to do is put down the alcohol and my problem is solved. I spent years sitting in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, not drinking, not snorting cocaine, not smoking weed, doing all of these things. And I got to tell you, my life got much, much worse. It swirled around the drain and I went right down into the shitter. That's what happened sitting in the rooms of AA, not drinking, not snorting cocaine. But I had the impression that my problem was solved. But it wasn't. What I was really suffering from was that spiritual malady, that lack of power. And I was knocking myself out day after day after day, playing God, trying to pull my life off. And the greatest discovery that I ever made was that my life was unmanageable, not because of alcohol, not because of cocaine, not because of sex. My life was unmanageable because I lacked power. And what I would do was throw cocaine, alcohol, sex at the problem, trying to solve it so that I could find a way by which I could live comfortably in this world, that I could take the rough edges off of all of this garbage that I was living with. I'm going to jump forward for one split second, page 51. Right here at the top, there's one sentence. It says, leaving aside the drink question, leaving aside the drink question, leaving aside the cocaine question, leave aside the sex question. You leave it all to the side. We're going to forget about that for a second. Goes on and says, they tell why living was so unsatisfactory, right? My life wasn't unsatisfactory because of the cocaine, because of the alcohol, and because of the sex. My life was unsatisfactory because my life was unmanageable, because I lacked power. Didn't matter. You remove those things, my life is still unsatisfying. I'm not satisfied. I'm an existentialist, right? Life sucks. That's the way that it is. Put up with it. It's going to be crappy forever. It's going to be a crappy ending. Oh, well, that's life. That's what I believed, right? But that's not the case. I come to find when I came into these rooms that there's something much different going on here, right? And it's a power greater than ourselves. And this book promises us that if we follow a few simple rules, if we follow some directions, that this power can pull us back from the gates of death, right? In Bill's story, he talks about when Ebby shows up at his house, right? And the first thing he says the guy was fresh-skinned and glowing. You know, I got to tell you, most men don't describe their buddies that way. Like when my buddy Bobby comes around and I see Bobby, I don't say, man, he's fresh-skinned and glowing, right? That's not it. What I would say is I'd say this man's on fire with these 12 steps. He's got God alive and well in his life. There's something different about this man, right? But Bill, he didn't have that verbiage. He didn't have that language yet. He didn't know exactly what was going on with Ebby. So they sit there and they have this conversation, right? And I promise you, I'm going to get to this sentence where we are, you know, here on page 47. It's all going to make sense. So Bill's sitting there with Ebby, and Ebby, he's there. He's just coming there to pass along what he's gotten if Bill cares to have it. Now, Bill says, of course I was interested in it. I had to be, for I was hopeless, right? Bill recognizes his situation. Now, I'm going to tell you, in these rooms, if we're not hopeless, it's real hard to get God. It's real hard to get God into our life. If I still got hope in anything other than God, I'm probably going to exercise my willpower along those lines. I'm probably going to run myself right into the ground. If I think I can sex a little on the side and take the edge off of life, I'm probably going to run that one into the ground. If I think I can lie, steat, and chill a little bit, I'm going to run that sucker into the ground. If I think I can willpower it, push my way, I'm going to do that. I'm going to continue to play God. And what's the ultimate outcome? I can tell you what the ultimate outcome is for me. The ultimate outcome for me is this. I mangle my life. I become an alcoholic, a cocaine addict, a sex addict, crushed by a self-imposed crisis. That's what happens. I did it. God didn't do it. I did it to myself, and I went right along. So when I arrive at this point, and I'm at that point where Bill is, right, sitting there, Evie's sitting there saying, you know, I got religion. Bill's like, fuck. He's aghast. That's what he says. Religion. He said last summer, an alcoholic crackpot. Now I suspect a little cracked about religion. He thinks he's off his rocker. But Bill, you know what? In his mind, he says, you know what? This is okay. I can deal with this because you know what? I got enough booze. I'll sit here. I'll drink. I'll endure his ranting. Let him go through all of his stuff and I'll be okay. At least I got company here, right? That's what Bill's thinking. But guess what? Ebby doesn't do any ranting at all. He doesn't. He just tells him in a simple way, in a matter-of-fact way, how a couple of guys showed up in court and persuaded the judge to let him go. Because why? Because they had, at the time, they called it religious. They had a religious program of action that could help him, right? And the judge says, go ahead, take him. Let's see what happens with this guy. And Bill says, it was evident. The results were in. It worked. And Ebby was there to pass it on to Bill if he wanted it. Now, when they're having this conversation, Bill, he's sitting there listening. He's drinking his booze. He's still kind of musing. He's in deep thought. But his thoughts aren't, hey, I'm buying this. What his thoughts are filled with prejudices. He's listening to Ebby, and he's thinking to himself, yeah, I remember listening to my grandfather. I remember sitting on the hill way over there while the preacher went on, thinking about all of this stuff, but man, it's just not working for me. And he's probably going back and forth with Ebby a little bit, and Ebby probably gets worn down. And it says they talked for hours. And at the end, I think Ebby just did one of these. It's like, Jesus Christ, Bill, I don't give a shit. Why don't you just choose your own conception of God, Bill? And it was in that moment, Bill says, holy crap, that statement hit me hard. He talks about standing in that shadow, that intellectual shadow, that icy cold intellectual shadow that he shivered for years. And then the next sentence says, I stood in the sunlight at last. Guess what? Bill's having a spiritual awakening in that very moment, right there in that very moment. And this is what I want to talk about. Bill goes on and he says it was at that point he realized that all he needed was willingness. It was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than themselves. He says, upon this foundation of complete willingness, I might have what I saw in my friend. Would I have it? Of course I would. Then he goes on, he says, thus I was convinced, right, that God would come to us if we wanted him enough, right? If he wanted him enough. Then Bill goes on and he talks about his experience in Winchester Cathedral, right? Says, when he first talks about it, he says he was moved and he wandered outside. Now he's starting to reflect, holy cow, God came to me in that moment. He's starting to realize this, that God actually came to him. Now, why did Bill go to God when he was in Winchester Cathedral? He was over there. He was going to war. He was afraid he was going to get his ass shot off. That's what he was afraid of, thought he was going to get blown to pieces and get killed. So he's scared and he's got the desperation and he goes to God. He has an experience with God and he gets a little shook by it and he wanders outside away from it, right? But now it's starting to come back. And Bill's in this new position of desperation because he's losing everything. He can't stop drinking. His life's falling apart. He has no money. He's stealing from his wife. His wife's working. His life is just totally swirling around the drain. He's confronted. He's confronted with this proposition. He's doomed to an alcoholic death, or he's going to have to live his life based on spiritual principles. These are not easy alternatives to face, right? But this is what happened. Bill says, okay, hold on a second. Let me think about this. And he thinks about it, right? And he continues this conversation with Evie. And Bill, if you watch, as you read We Agnostics, his story tracks perfectly with the progression of We Agnostics. You can see Bill go from the position where he's saying he thinks there's no brotherhood of men. It's a grim jest with all the wars and everything. I don't think religion has done anything good for the world. And he says, if there's anything, there's the devil. He's boss universal and he has me. Bill is saying point blank, he feels like he's being controlled and possessed and driven by the devil, that the devil is ruining his life. He doesn't believe in this other thing. He doesn't believe, but he starts to during this conversation. And this is what he says. He says, my beliefs about miracles were being drastically revised right then and there with Ebby sitting across the table from him. He says, never mind the musty past. Forget about that garbage. Here sits a miracle directly across the table from me, and he shouts great tidings, right? But then this is what happens with Bill. He's a guy like me. He's like probably like a lot of us. We see this. We hear it. It sounds good. When Bobby shares this with me, I see his life and I say, gosh, that looks good. But then my old prejudices start coming up. I start saying, yeah, I mean, Bobby's just a better person to me. I mean, Bobby was just born into a different lot of life. That's just the way it was supposed to be. God just wants that for him, but God doesn't want it for me. If I go to God, God's going to reject me. After everything that I've done, why would God want anything to do with me? Why would God do this for me? All of these prejudices. Yeah, I'd go to AA, I'd go to CA, and I would try these steps, but I can't. Why? I got a prejudice because of that guy over there. I think he's a jerk. I don't like him. I don't like the way he shares in the meeting. I don't want to sound like that guy. You know what I mean? I don't want to look like one of those guys in the meeting. I would go to church. I would trust God. But why do I want to do that? Well, because Bobby down the road, he goes to church. He's always talking to me about God. But guess what? He's got a girl on the side. He's cheating on his wife. And then Jimmy over here. I know he's stealing and cheating on his taxes. And I know he's stealing from his business partner and doing all sorts of stuff. That's not, why would I want to go to church and get that in my life? I don't want to do that. But the thing is that I am totally crushing the 12 steps of AA, the 12 steps of CA, Alcoholics Anonymous, church, God, based on the experiences of watching other people, a couple of other people, and it's wholesale condemnation. I say, no, I don't want that. I don't want that, right? And see, these are the things that are blocking me off from God. And I'm sitting in these rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous suffering. I want to die sitting in these rooms, right? I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm really, really suffering. I want to tell you an experience that I had that was a real eye-opener for you, that when I first came into the program, I don't share about this too often. It's just one of those things. We have these experiences. But there are a couple friends that I left behind. When I came into the rooms and I started to do this stuff, these guys stayed behind and they continued using, my buddy Pat and my buddy Brian, and over 2 8-balls of cocaine. 2 8-balls of cocaine. Pat pulls out a 9mm and blows Brian's head off, right? 2 weeks into the program, blows his head off over a little cocaine, right? Over some cocaine. That's why he did it. And I'm sitting in these rooms and I'm thinking, gosh, I got to stay away from the cocaine. If I stay away from the booze, then I'll be all right. I'm not going to be like Pat. I'm not going to be over at Trenton State Prison serving life for murder. Not me, right? I'm not going to be Brian with my brain splattered all over a kitchen. Not going to be me. I'll be A-okay. And then I sit here and I do these things. I show up, I go to a lot of meetings. They tell me to get active. I get active. I join a group. I'm making coffee. I'm setting up the meetings. I'm doing all this stuff. But really what that is just activity. It's just activity. It's not into action as they describe it in our book, right? I needed to get into action, practicing all of these principles in our life, in my life. I needed to get these steps alive and well in my life. I needed that connection with a power greater than myself. So it's going to bring me to this sentence. It says, at the start, this is all we needed to commence spiritual growth, to affect our first conscious relation with God as we understood him. This is all that we needed. We needed this open mind. We needed this willingness. We needed to be willing to set aside our prejudices. But there was a battle that ensued for me in the beginning, right? Because I would be like, I think I'm agnostic. But after a little bit of work going through this with my sponsor, here's the things that I discovered. I had a higher power all along, because maybe you'll identify with this. This is what I did every time there was a bag of cocaine in front of me. I said, you know what? I don't care what you do. Take my sleep, take my life, take my money, take my girlfriend, take my family. I don't care. Just put it up my nose. Let me snort this stuff. Let me get that high. Same thing with alcohol, with sex, with everything. I don't care what happens to me. Take my life. Just give me that feeling, because this is too damn hard for me to muscle through. I can't do it. I can't do it. And the truth was, I was faced with the reality that I had a higher power all along. And that higher power was cocaine. That higher power was alcohol. That higher power was sex. I turned my will and my life over to it every single time. And I sought it. When I didn't have it, I sought it like my life depended upon it, right? That's how desperately I went after it, because I knew what it would do for me. There's a part in a doctor's opinion that says we can no longer differentiate the true from the false. I can admit that it's injurious. I can admit it. But man, I need it, and I don't care. I'm going to listen to whatever story's going on in my head to get this stuff. And that's what I did. I bought the lie every single time. So if we think all I got to do is just stop lying to myself, then I'll be okay. Makes sense. Sounds good. I don't have the power to stop lying to myself. I don't have it. The book makes it very clear. Silkworth says what we really need is that psychic change. That's what we need to have. Once that psychic change occurs, that very same person who had little control, who had little ability to control their desire for cocaine, their little desire for alcohol, suddenly finds himself easily able to control that desire. Easily able. Why is that? Because the psychic change has occurred. Then it goes on and says, the only effort necessary being that which required to follow a few simple rules, right? Yes, it does say rules, and it does use the word required, right? So don't let anybody ever tell you that there's no musts in this program. There's a lot of musts. The word must shows up over 100 times in our big book. There's a number of other sentences that imply must all the way through this book. These are the things that I must do. These are the things that I must believe if I'm going to recover from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. If I don't believe these things, I'm not going to be desperate enough for God. If I don't believe these things, I still think I'm going to be able to pull this deal off, right? I got to be in that position. And if I'm in that position and I can trust God, then I've got this chance. And this is what happens. This sentence, I'm going to read it again. At the start, this is all we needed to commence spiritual growth. That's all we needed to commence spiritual growth. Just the beginning, not establish a full-blown relationship with God yet. Not at all. We're just talking about growth. You want to get into the gym, you want to get jacked, you want to look like a supermodel, you want to look like a bodybuilder. I'm going to tell you right now, it's going to start with your first visit to the gym. You can't go in there on the 100th day. You got to start on the first day, and you got to show up 99 more days, right? And then after that, another 99, and then another 99. That's the way this deal works. This is the same thing. We're just at the starting point here, man. Don't cut yourself short, right? Don't cut yourself short. Now, here's the next part. It says, at the start, this is all we needed to commence spiritual growth, to effect our first conscious relation with God. Here's the thing, guys. I am 100% certain of this now, even though I never was before, but I am now 100% certain of this, is that I have been connected to God my entire life. I can never be disconnected. My problem was I was unconscious. I didn't know it, but when I woke up spiritually, I discovered that I've been walking around spiritually sleeping my entire life. That sixth sense that every single one of us has in this room right now was dormant. I couldn't hear it. I couldn't use it. And there's a reason for that, because I was so blocked off up here with all of my fears, my worries, my jealousy, my envy, my self-pity, which, man, I got to tell you, I love self-pity. I love feeling sorry for myself, right? And I'm going to tell you why, because if I'm a victim, then that means you're at fault and I don't have to do anything. I can just sit here and wallow, right? That's the truth. But here's the thing. When we go through this, I find out I'm not the victim at all. I'm the one who's been victimizing everybody all along, right? But I didn't know that until I started to take action here. So what happens is I wake up spiritually. And when I wake up spiritually, I am now in conscious contact with God. Later on in the book, it's going to tell us that God's going to inspire us. Now he's talking about the exercise of the sixth sense. God is going to send us messages. God will send us messages. It will come in different ways. Maybe you'll be driving down the highway and there's a big billboard, and whatever it is, there's something that hits you about that, and you make a connection about something. You say, holy cow, there it is. And you want to know how you're going to know that it came from God? Because you're going to feel it deep inside. You will feel it and you won't question it. You'll know it. It will be a profound knowing deep within your core. Right? There's other ways. I will sit in meditation, and I'm telling you, there will be thoughts that come to me out of the blue, and I say, snap out of it, and I say, what was that? Where? Holy cow. And if I just trust that, I'm telling you, God is taking me to places that I've never been before, which will blow my mind, which this right here is supported by the next sentence. It says, afterwards, we found ourselves accepting many things which then seemed entirely out of reach, right? We're growing spiritually. We're waking up consciously. Now, suddenly, now that we're connected with God and we're on fire and we're filled with excitement, suddenly I can start accepting other spiritual terms. Like, you know what? Love and tolerance of others is our code. Right? I don't have to walk down the street and look at this person and say, she's a pig, she's a cow, look at that guy, he's a fat slob, he should go to the gym, that guy needs a dentist, this guy should wear a toupee, that guy should get rid of his toupee, on and on and on and on, judging all of this stuff. Suddenly, I'm in a position where I'm not threatened by any of you anymore. I'm not threatened. I don't care how good looking of a guy you are. I can introduce you to my wife, and I'm not afraid you're going to take her away. I'm not afraid she's going to leave, even if you try, right? See, I'm on different footing today. I'm in the position where I'm trusting God. I'm in a different position where I'm trusting God, right? And when I'm in that position, I am safe and protected. The book tells us this. I'm jumping all over the place with these promises and these predictions, but I'm telling you, these are the places that we arrive, and we can arrive there very, very quickly. You want to know why? Because God's right here, right now, in this moment. And the moment you make the connection with God, things instantly, suddenly begin to change, right? I'm going to tell you how one of my first beginnings started. I live in Princeton, New Jersey, so I'm blessed that I get to be around a lot of intelligent people. They don't necessarily look intelligent, and they lack a lot of common sense, I promise you. But intellectually, book-wise, these are really, really smart people, right? So I'm sitting down with this guy. He's a Humboldt Award winner, right? He's a brilliant mathematician. He's an astrophysicist. He's a lot smarter than me. And I'm sitting down with this guy, and I said, Ed, let me ask you a question, buddy. And he said, what's that, Eric? And I said, do you believe in God? And in that moment, I saw his face change, and I thought, I just asked him the wrong question. I'm not going to get the answer I wanted, right? I'm like, here we go. He says, Eric, let me ask you a question. You ever heard of the Big Bang? And I said, I have. And he said, let me explain something to you about that. I said, all right. He says, there's these two atoms. They're whirling around at each other at an incredibly high rate of speed, insanely fast. And in a trillionth of a billionth of 1 second, that's fast. A trillionth of a billionth of 1 second, they collide and they explode into approximately 93% of all the matter we know in the entire universe. And he said, and if that's not God saying, let there be light, I don't know what that is. Right? Right? And we gain access to that power. That power. There's an intelligence behind all of that. As we go through this book, you're going to see that Bill, he talks about that prosaic steel girder. Bobby and I love the prosaic steel girder. Every single one of us in here has seen a prosaic steel girder. At least if you've been in a car or you've driven down a highway and been under a bridge, you've seen a prosaic steel girder. You know those steel girders that hold that bridge up? They're ugly as sin. They normally have like pigeons on them, birds on them, graffiti. Maybe they're rusty, all of this stuff. They're not lovely, but that's a prosaic steel girder. But they go a little bit further and they talk about these electrons and everything that's whirling around in there, that there's a precise order of intelligence that holds that steel girder together. So what we're talking about is this idea of, on face value, I look at something and then I push it away. Spiritual matters, I don't want to hear about it. That's all that foo-foo shit you guys like to talk about. Look at the steel girder. Yeah, I see it's a steel girder, a big effing deal. Who cares, right? No. Let's take a little bit closer look. Let's look at this. There's something else going on here, right? And that's what our book talks about, that we want to trust upon this visual evidence, right? But the book talks about how that may be the weakest evidence of all. I can blow it up for you right now and confirm that. Tonight, when it's dark out and you want to go outside and look at the moon, I want you to look at it and point where the moon is and say to someone, that's where the moon is. And then I want you to pause and think about this, that is not where the moon is. That's where the moon was 4 minutes ago. That's where it was. So if you were a sniper and you were trying to shoot that moon, you'd miss by a mile because it's not there anymore. That's where it was 4 minutes ago. That sucker is moving. It's taking 4 minutes for that light to get down here to planet Earth. So we're only seeing where it was, right? But I have this belief that that's where it is. And I have those same belief systems about a power greater than myself in my life, and it's completely wrong. Completely wrong, right? Is any of this working for you guys? Is this registering? Is this landing? All right, solid, right? I don't know if, I don't want to drive you crazy. I hope you guys are having fun because I'm enjoying this, right? I love this stuff. So here's the thing. I gain access to this power, right? To this power, this same power that created all of this. I get to have that power in my life today, right? Now, how do I gain access to it? This is how I gained access to it, by going through these 12 steps, exactly as how they were laid out in the book. Right? I followed those directions and I opened up to it every single step of the way. Now, it tells us in the sentence, it says at the start. So at the start, we're just talking about a level of willingness. Do I have the willingness? If I've got the willingness, that's more than enough. I want to reassure you, you are on your way. Right? And then the sentence goes on. This is all we needed to commence spiritual growth, to affect our first conscious relationship with God as we understood him. This is how we're understanding him now. And I can tell you, as I go through this process, my relationship with God changes. My relationship with God changes. And I understand him much differently today than when I first understood him. Right? But whatever your understanding is right now, it's not inadequate. It's perfectly adequate. We talk about that mustard seed, right? Every once in a while, you guys, we know what we're talking about when we hear about the mustard seed. It's because it's so tiny. That's more than enough. It's more than enough to start that growth, right? Now, here's what I would do with my relationship with God. It's much like gardening. What I would do is I'd plant those seeds, I'd pour the water on it, and I would stand back, cross my arms, and I'd look at it, and I'd think, I wonder if the water got to the seed, because it needs to get there, right? I mean, I got to get the water to the seed, because otherwise this isn't going to happen. So then you pull away the dirt, right? You pull it away, and you're like, yeah, no, I got there. All right, it's good. So I push that back, right? And then I'm worried about the sunlight on. Kind of overcast today. I don't know if this is going to work, right? I don't know if this is going to work. So, gosh, maybe I should move the seed. You know what? Let's just dig this sucker up. I'm going to move it to a place where I know that there's more sun. So I'm going to dig a new hole, dug the seed up, going to re-water it. I got to check to make sure the water got there. I know it did the first time, but I got to be sure this time. So I'm going to re-dig it up, and then I'm going to rebury it. And then I'm sitting there and I'm like, it's still overcast. Will the sun come out? I don't know. Gosh, what if the sun never comes out again? Holy cow, that would be horrible. My God. I mean, Jesus, what if it's like this all the time for the rest of my life? What if I wonder if anybody else knows whether the sun's going to come out, right? I mean, is it going to come out again? And I go through this whole process, right? And what I've done is I'm starting to just pick apart God. I'm starting to pick it apart. all I need is the willingness, right? And see, what I find is that if I put that seed in the ground and I cover it up and I water it and I let the sun come out whenever the sun's going to come out, this is what happens. That seed starts to grow, and it does not need my help. It does not need my help. And here's the thing. God doesn't need my help either. God does not need my help. All he needs is my willingness. And my demonstration of my willingness is to go through these 12 steps, go through this process to clean out all of me, all of this self that is standing in between me and God, so that God can come in. And later on in this chapter, it's going to tell us, it refers to it as the last analysis. It says it's in the final analysis. And that's where we found God, deep down within us, right? I discovered that I'd been looking for God in cocaine, in alcohol, in sex, money, cars, jobs, prestige, everything out there. And the reality is that God was with me all along while I was out there looking for him. He's just like, come on, guy, I'm right here, man. That ain't it. Go ahead. You want to do the cocaine? Go ahead. I'm a gentleman. Get it out. Mangle yourself, and hopefully you'll be desperate enough to come to me. Oh, it's going to be alcohol now. All right. Go ahead. Give it a go. Run with the alcohol. Mangle yourself. No problem. Oh, now it's going to be a chick. All right, dude, get that girl and do your thing, right? Oh, it's going to be two. Okay. You want two girls because you need a side piece, right? I get it. No problem. And then you're going to cheat on both of them because you know what? You're going to hire the professional to come by that we don't want anybody to know about. That professional girl. We don't want anybody to know about her. We pay for it. Come on. I don't want anybody to know about that. All of this stuff, right? And God was right there all along while I was looking for him. And I discovered that in this last analysis, as I go through this process, what happens is I discover that this is not a process of addition. I don't need to add anything to me. I am more than enough as I am right now. And I mean it, more than enough, too much. In fact, what this is, instead of a process of addition, it's a process of subtraction. I need to get me out of the way. I got to get my anger out of the way. I got to get my resentments out of the way. I got to get my fear. The other thing that I used to worship too, that I got to get out of the way, my reason. I trust my mind. I can reason my way through this. I can figure it out. I don't know about you guys, but I used to have this habit of all the time, whenever a problem would come up, I'd say, I got to figure this out. It was always, I got to figure it out. And never once did I look at it and say, man, I got myself into this. I got to get out of the way and let God get me out of this, right? Never once did I say that until I started to go through this process and I recognized that I was truly crushed by a self-imposed crisis, right? So once I start going through this process, I start to really identify with this sentence where it says, afterward, we found ourselves accepting many things which then seemed entirely out of reach. I just read that word acceptance. I want to share a little story with you guys about when I first met my sponsor. And hopefully you'll enjoy this. I don't want to offend anybody. Please don't be offended. Just know that this was my experience with my sponsor, okay? But there's a famous page. There's two famous pages. It's the same page. It just changed numbers. It floats around in AA. I'm sure it floats around in CA. Page 449, 417, right? I see a couple smiles, someone shaking her head. Yeah, acceptance is the answer to all of my problems. So when I first made my decision to go through with this process, this is what I did. There was this guy who was coming through my town. He suddenly appeared. I lived in Princeton. I still live in Princeton. It was a very conservative town at the time. Nobody looked like this dude. This dude looked like me with a shaved head, right? He intentionally shaved his head this way, but he left a tuft of hair right here in the front, long. And he would take wax or mousse and mold it into a rhino horn every day. In addition to it, that sucker was rainbow colored. He colored it up. Now, he fits in anywhere today. You wouldn't even look at him twice. You just see him and say, oh yeah, that's the way it is today. Back then, he stood out like a sore thumb. He walks into a meeting one night, and this guy shares this message about how he gained access to God and how God had restored him to sanity, and he no longer had to drink or drug or any of this stuff anymore, right? And I said, I need to speak to this guy. Go over and I asked him if he'd be my sponsor. He said it would be his honor. And I got offended. My first resentment towards this guy, your honor. What a smug fucking thing to say, you dickhead. What a fucked up thing to say to a guy. Your honor, you think you're such hot shit. Jesus Christ. I was ready to walk away from this guy. I was so bent out of shape over that. But see, here's the thing. He was in a much different position. See, he had been restored to sanity. He has this experience with God. He's living on the other side. I'm not. I'm still in the before position. I still want to put a bullet through my head. I'm still hating everybody and judging everybody. I haven't had that experience yet. I was to have that experience in a very short period of time. And this is what happened. He said, come to my house tomorrow. I said, okay. Gave me his address. I knew where he lived. I go over to his house. I knock on the door. He comes to the door. Listen, he looks at me. He looks down. And this is what he does. He's like, where's your big book? I said, well, I left it in the car. He goes, dude, let me ask you a question. When you go to a bar, do you leave your wallet in the car? I said, no. He goes, when you come to my house, don't leave your fucking big book in the car. Go get it. So I was like, Jesus Christ, this guy's just maybe a smidge over the top, right? Fucking hell. So I'm walking over there. I come back with my big book. I am seriously questioning this choice that I've made again. Now I've got my second resentment, and he's about to give me my third, okay? This is what he does when I get up to the door. He extends his hand. He wants the big book. He wants it. I'm like, fuck, this guy's something else. So I give him the big book. He opens up to page 449. I had a third edition at the time. 449, acceptance is the answer to all of my problems, right? He opens up. Please don't be offended. This is just my experience. The first thing I said was, this motherfucker's going to hit me with acceptance. I can't believe it. I hate that. It's not going to work. And this is what he does. He takes 449. He rips it out of the book. He crumbles it up and he throws it on the floor. And he said, acceptance is not the answer to all of your problems. He said, gaining access to a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem, is the answer to all of your problems. And then he asked me the key question. He said, can you accept that? And I said I could. And he brought me in. And we started to go through this process. And I want to just clean that up for you guys, because sometimes I share that in a meeting and I don't go far enough explaining the understanding behind all of that. And some people, they get a little offended. And then when the shares come on, they're like, oh, I'd rather appreciate what you said about acceptance, but, I don't know that I necessarily agree with it. You see, my life right now, I accept everything. And then they say, I just want to check in with you and tell you that I think I'm going to lose my job, and I got into a fight with my girlfriend, and I'm really unhappy. And I'm like, why don't you just fucking accept it all then, buddy? That's the answer. You're just lacking acceptance. But see, that's not the fucking solution. That's not it. It's never going to do it. Here's the thing. Do I want to go through life accepting everything every single day? It changes all the time. My God, I'll just sit there accepting, miserable. Right back to page 51, I'll explain why life is so unsatisfactory, because I got to accept all this fucking horse shit out here, right? That's why life's unsatisfactory, which would be the truth, right? But here's the thing. This is what I understand today, is that there's man's will and there's God's will, right? There's man's will and there's God's will. That acceptance goes on and it says, nothing, absolutely nothing happens in God's world by mistake, right? And if I believe that, oh, mama, I better hold on to that one for that's going to be a tough one. And I'm going to tell you, this is one of the scenarios that was thrown out at me. And it was a real scenario that happened in real time. A friend of mine, their daughter came to AA, went to an AA dance. She was drug out of the AA dance, and she was raped in a van in a parking lot. And people told her nothing, absolutely nothing happens in God's world by mistake. I tell you what, that's a tough one to hold on to. Do I believe that's God's will? Is that what I want to hold on to? Is that what I want to believe? That that's what God wanted for my daughter? I better just accept that right now and get over it and put a big smile on my face, because acceptance is the answer. No, what I discover is that that's not God's will. That's man's will. That was a very, very sick individual that was consciously separated from a power greater than themselves. And they were not out there thinking about love and tolerance of others. They weren't thinking about how they could make a contribution. They were sick, and they were takers, and they were mean, dangerous people. And I got news for you. That victim, that girl, the answer for her was not acceptance. I'll tell you what the answer for her was. Immediate medical attention because of what happened to her physically, followed by intensive therapeutic intervention, because she needed that. She desperately needed that after that type of trauma, right? That was part of the solution. And then she got to a relationship with God. And I know that that woman has recovered and she's living happily, joyously, and free today. I will tell you that her mother was an old friend of mine. I haven't talked to her for a while, but she had such a resentment against, oh my God, acceptance. She hated it. She was so furious after what happened to her daughter. And this is what happened. She kept praying about it, talking to other people. She would slam her fist down when people would say acceptance is the answer. But this is exactly what happened. One night when she was in a much better place, God sat her down at a dinner table, at a dinner party with Dr. Paul right next to her, the man who wrote that. Yep. And she said, Paul, I got to tell you, I've been waiting for a long time to talk to you, buddy, right? But she didn't go off on him. She said, I just got to tell you what happened to me. And she explained what happened. And this is what Paul said to her. He said, Michael, her name was Michael, female alcoholic. That's another story. I'll tell you how I stumbled on that one. That was a funny one too. But in this situation, he said, Michael, I want you to know, I wish I never wrote that. That is taken so far out of context, left and right. I'm going to tell you, I was in a depression and I was trying to justify my miserable existence at that point in time. It's not in the first 164 pages, so you should not listen to it or pay any attention. And I ask you this favor. If I get anybody who calls me questioning or has a resentment against page 449, can I give them your number? And she said, you most certainly can. And she fielded a number of those calls. Because this is the thing. We run into situations in our life, in recovery, where the question becomes, is it God's will? Is it man's will? Should I do this? Should I not do that? Right? I don't know. But here's the thing. When I go through these 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous and I get into that 4-step inventory and I get into those turnarounds and I ask myself those questions there, every single one of them, where was I selfish? Where was I dishonest? Where was I self-seeking? Where was I afraid? And I take a look at myself. This is what happened to me. All the results came back and there were fingerprints all over everything. And the forensic results said this, said, Eric, it was you all along. It was never God. It was you. It was you. I was crushed by a self-imposed crisis. That was a fact. Did I have things happen to me that I was a victim of? Of course I did. But here's the thing. My choice was that I continued to choose to be the victim and allow that to dictate as an excuse my future behavior. From there on out. You see, it's okay for me to treat you this way because this is what happened to me when I was 5 years old. Right? Right? You know what I'm saying? No, that's not. I was a victim in that moment, but then after that, I used that sucker as a fuel. I used that sucker as an excuse for me to justify my behavior and to seek whatever it is that I was seeking that I wanted to get out of myself. Right? And once I get to that point, then I'm really starting to trust God. When I'm looking at this, then God can really start to come in. Then I can sit before God naked. And I don't mean physically naked, but I mean spiritually. I am naked. I am devoid of self. And I can sit there after this exorcism, which it is, man. It's an exorcism, right? Sit there with this, right? And just soak and bask in God. And this is what I discovered, was that I was never detached from God. It was like coming home. I can tell you that it was the experience just like Bill felt. I stood in that sunlight at last. I discovered that I was the sunbeam. I wasn't the sun, but I was the sunbeam. And the sunbeam can never be detached from the sun, ever. I discovered that when I'm sitting in a dark room and it's really, really, really dark, and I introduce light to the room, that darkness doesn't hide. It ceases to exist. The darkness ceases to exist. If I try to reintroduce darkness into that well-lit room, the only way that I could do that is I'm going to have to shut the light off or cover it up and block the light. And that was the story of my life. I lived blocking that life. I lived in this darkness that was never real in the first place. It was only the absence of my conscious presence, the conscious presence of God in my life. That's all that it was. It was nothing else. So when we sit here and we look at this and it says at the start, this is all we needed to commence spiritual growth to affect our first conscious relation with God as we understood him. All we have to ask ourselves is, am I willing? Am I willing? Am I willing to let go of all of this reason up here? Am I willing to let go of my prejudices? Am I willing to sit there and take that leap? Am I willing to jump off that cliff? And if you're like me, you'll say yes, but you'll also peek over the edge of the cliff and you'll say, I want to jump, but the fucking hand isn't there. Where's God's hand, right? I want to do it. But that's that part later on in this chapter where they talk about how reason takes us so far, that bridge of reason. Then we talk about crossing over onto the shore of faith, where it brings luster to tired eyes and flagging spirits and so on and so on. We get this new energy. It's people that are sitting in the rooms that are telling you that, listen, this is the experience that I have. And if you will just and only follow this process, you too can step ashore. I don't want to be that guy like the critic of the Wrights brothers. In the beginning, they said, no way that fucking thing's going to fly. There is no way. And then when the sucker flew, newspapers didn't want to write about it. They were like, I'm not going to write about it. Fuck no. I don't know how that happened. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. And they let other people do it because they were worried about their reputation. And then there were some people that held on to that idea. Nope, I won't believe it. Yet those planes are whipping over. They don't want to believe it. Nope, can't happen. It's been proven. The greatest mathematical minds have proven it can't happen. Yet they see the evidence all over the place. Am I going to sit here in the rooms and say, nope, there's no God? When I sit here right in front of you and I tell you flat out that it is as the result of having a relationship with a power greater than myself, God, that I am free today. I am a free man. Am I going to deny it when Bobby tells me that? Am I going to deny it when Purdy tells me that? Am I going to be that guy that says there's no planes in the sky? It's been proven they can't fly. I don't know what's going on up there, but that's not real. Am I going to be that guy? I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be that guy. And when you go look at that part in that story, it tells you what the mainspring was. The mainspring of that was the Wright brothers' childish faith. They believed even when everybody else told them no dice. No dice. See, outside of these rooms, people are going to tell me, Eric, there's no God. You don't have to turn your will and your life over. You're getting brainwashed and all of this stuff. Do I want to listen to them? Or do I want to fly? Do I want to fly? When I see so many people in these rooms sharing their experience that they're flying today as a result of God and that they gained access to that power because of these 12 steps. Do I want to sit there and poo-poo that and knock it? Nope. I was desperate enough. I jumped right into this thing with everything that I had. And I said, God, take me, baby. Do what you got to do with me. And you know what? That was the moment I jumped off the cliff. And when I was in the air, that's when God's hand came out to catch me. It wasn't coming before I jumped. God's not going to be played for a sucker. You jump, God will catch you every single time. And I stake my life on that. I want to thank you guys so much for allowing me to come in here and share with you guys today. I had so much fun. I hope you guys did too. I know that I don't know. I know that I enjoyed myself. I hope you guys did too and got something out of it. Thanks, Purdy.